Hey friends. Ooh, yeah, the winter chill is finally starting to come upon us. And I'm right in front of this tree that I want to talk about today with you. And just notice it for a little bit. There's the strange stuff at the bottom is some kids that have been making a fort. But just noticing it's spreading branches. Look at that. That's in comparison to other trees around here that have a different growth habit. And before I jump into this, I wanted to let you all know that I am running a Forest Monk program in the spring. I have 3 spots available, 2 of them are taken up. So I do have 1 more spot available. I'm looking for a certain sort of person who would join this group. And instead of giving a bunch of details, I'm just going to give some feeling words. If you have been thinking about the Forest Monk program and these feeling words resonate with you, then go ahead and write me and we could talk about possibilities. Okay, here's a few words. Creative, meditative, deep, patient, exploratory, playful. All right. So here's this tree behind me. We spoke last week about talking with rocks. Today I wanted to talk about talking with trees. And again, I'm hoping to expand our ideas of what communication can be. And the reason I'm talking about communication rather than just interaction is that ideally, especially if you're a longer term participant here at this channel, then the word communication holds a certain intimacy for you. And that's exactly why I'm using it in these videos. There's lots of ways we could look at the connection between a human and a horse, or a human and any other animal, a human and a rock, a human and a plant. But communication, for me at least, involves a lot of listening. And listening is different than just exerting our will on the world. You know, we're all used to the mindset that just looks at the world and sees something that I can express my will over. Try to make the world behave the way I want it to behave, in short. Sometimes that can feel like that's what life is all about. We're this little bag of flesh, and then there's this big wild world out there that wants to do things its own way. And our task through life is just to try to push and force the things around us to get them to be the way we want. But communication urges us to look at a different sort of a pathway, one in which we listen. You know, I often use that example of surfing, even though I'm not a surfer. You can see this huge difference between someone who walks out and tries to just push against the waves, and someone who walks out and gets tumbled by the waves, and someone who goes out and surfs with the waves, finds this connection where I would call it a communication, where there's a dancing and a flow. I saw this once in Hawaii with a guy that was not surfing, but just went out into some waters that would be considered very dangerous and was just rolling with them and moving almost like a seal would move. And he did this in this beautiful way that showed that he had a real deep connection with the water. He was able to listen to it, and in a way I'd say the water listened to him as well. There's a way that we can interact that is not will-based, but flow-based. So we look at this tree back behind us, and you notice it looks different than all the other trees in the woods. And if you are familiar with trees and the language of their growth and how that can speak to us, then you might look at this tree and see something different than what the average person might see. So someone that's not versed in that language will just look and say, wow, that's a big tree in the woods. You might be looking at it and saying, okay, that's what some people call a pasture tree. We notice that broad reaching of the limbs. And trees do that when they're out in the open. They can spread out and catch sun in all directions. The other trees around here, notice, are growing tall and straight. That's what happens in the woods, where there is a lot of kind of equal growth, trees reaching up, and there's not big open spots where the trees can reach out, so they're reaching up and then trying to spread out at the top to catch any sunlight that they can. Now we can start to communicate with the landscape a little bit. Because of that pasture tree, we can say, wow, it looks like around here, at the time that that tree was growing, this was all cleared land. And the forest that's now surrounding it is a relatively new development, at least within the lifetime of this tree. And if we searched around carefully, we might find old fence posts or other signs of where that pasture was. We might even be able to make some pretty good guesses as to what sort of animals were kept here. But there's more to this tree than it being a pasture tree, because it's communicating to us something about the history of the forest that we're sitting in. But you see that little shelter at the bottom. And there's also a place where there's a big hole in the side of it where an owl often lives. And raccoons use this. The kids play on it and have broken some of the branches that have fallen off of it and changed, right? Altered the course of this tree. Now, like that rock, or someone kind of corrected me, I call it a stone, that I was holding last time. And I was saying that just the oils from my fingers are going to affect that a little bit and change it. The salts going to interact with that mineral and change the story of that rock, even if just in a very minute way. Here it's a little bit more evident. The humans, the kids playing on it, the adults that play on it are altering and changing that tree in more visible ways, broken pieces of bark, broken branches, than we might see with that stone. And if we frame all this in the idea of communication, then for me, when I walk around in the woods and I see something like this tree, and I think of it as a conversation, a communication that's happening between us, I look in a different way. So I become engaged in a different way than if I use a different framing. This is where, even if you don't believe that plants have anything akin to consciousness, you can still use your imagination to say, hey, what if I just think of this tree as a friend, as another entity that I'm going to have a prolonged relationship with. This tree I've known now for probably 4 years, and I've seen it go through the loss of a huge limb. And as I said, I've seen owls nesting in it and been able to climb in it and swing on it and have all kinds of engagement with that tree. My life becomes a little richer now whenever I even think of that tree, because I have all that intimate engagement with it. And of course, this goes across the board. It's not just trees and rocks. When we think of another human, often we can see somebody and we can just think of what we're trying to get out of them. And this can be even in a marriage. Maybe you just want to prove your point, or that the the idea that you have is more right than their idea, or you want something done in a certain way. If you're in a leadership role, you maybe want people to act in a certain way, do tasks in a certain way. This sort of practical, mechanical view of the world where we just are trying to get it to do what we want. It can work in some ways, but it doesn't necessarily give us that feeling of intimacy and connection that we have when we see a person, and even if we want them to do something, we can make that secondary to our connection with them. And of course, the magical thing is then often we find that the thing that we want comes easier when we have a connection with somebody than when we're trying to force them. We're going to see this happening with a horse. When we see Mirabelle not trying to force behaviors, but being playful, asking, connecting, so that we see two entities, two beings that start to have fun together, enjoy their connection, become friends. So if you tried it with rocks or stones this last week, try it with some plants. Try it with some trees. Trees, which I will get more into during this exploration. Trees have so many stories to tell in the way that they're growing, in marks on their bark, in the way that their leaves appear. There is so much that trees are communicating, are speaking to us, if we can learn their language. And then we start to recognize that where we place a campfire can affect a tree based on maybe the heat burning some leaves, or the heat going through the ground and damaging some roots. And even in the realm of bushcraft, when you start to talk with a tree, you might start to look and notice, even from far across the forest, a certain way that a tree is growing, or a color difference that's telling you that there might be a dead part in that tree where you would find some punk wood to start a fire when conditions are really wet and otherwise a little bit not optimal for fire making. That's one of the things that's most fun about having people out at ReWild U for something like the Forest Monk program. Over 3 months, people can go from just seeing a forest and not much else to starting to develop relationships with hundreds of different species that inhabit this forest, starting to read tracks, understand these languages, these writings that are all around us, if only we start to tune into them. And likewise, we start to get a different feel for how we affect the world around us. You know, one of the first things when making a long-term camp that I recommend to people is don't collect the firewood right around your camp. Walk for it. Go to a distance. Sometimes people do that. Other times they just collect the firewood right around their camp because it's easier. But then that time comes when you're sick, or you've gotten back late and it's dark and you need some readily available firewood. If you haven't harvested all the firewood around your camp, you have a lot right there, easy pickings for those times when you really need it. That's just a little example of a way that we change our interaction with the natural world when we are cognizant of how communication is both ways, how the world can affect us, but we affect the world as well. All right, my friends. So If you're up for it, go out and find a tree. Pay some attention to it. See if you can write something down in the comments that sticks out for you about this interaction with the tree. Something you notice that you would not have noticed if you just looked at it with your regular eyes. But now maybe you're trying to talk with that tree a little bit, communicate, get engaged and intimate. And what did you notice that you wouldn't have noticed otherwise? All right, my friends, thank you for watching. Can't wait to talk with you in the comments. And so much love to you all.